Thank you very much. I'm going to kick off this session, and I wanted just to first say yes, something has changed. It's probably the same jacket, the same tie, the same color of the shirt, but definitely the hairs don't have the same quality. The slight difference. But in terms of the content, we are very aligned with the previous session. And these are what we're going to present you on some personal and personal investigation, personal methodology that we use with our both our customers or the individuals that we coach. So these are all pragmatic experience coming from the business side and less from the academic side. So I just wanted to thank you. Professor Park, for his wonderful introduction that really sets the stage to what we are going to say today. I wanted to start with this quote from St. Thomas Aquinas. Whatever is received according to the nature of the recipient. What does it mean? It's maybe that, can you imagine water coming? And you have a bottle to receive water, or you have a plate, or whatever. It is what defines what we are going to understand, and therefore to memorize, and therefore to all that is about our behavioral pattern, really depends on how our mind is structured, which bias does it have, etc. So when Thomas Aquinas is doing this, it's really not about the efficiency of communication. You know that 5% of verbal communication remains. It's really about the very nature of how our mind is structured that is going to define what is received. So I thought it was very important to start like this. Another way to say it, we do not believe what we see what we believe. And that's absolutely essential. So in this essay, we were asked not really to talk about education in general, but to focus on the education of the mind and its faculties, and how it might be trained for the good of nowadays and future generations. So we came up to a plan. So we wanted first to define, well, do we have a common understanding of what the mind is? And that's going to be critical in this essay. And then we raise the question how to change our unconscious pattern that will introduce some potential faculties of the mind, and then want to wonder why and what for we are trained today this way, before going to the discussion about what might be needed for the 21st century. So when I use the word mind, what is the symbolic picture you see? Do you draw a brain and a data processing facility? Or do you imagine a stack of past memories and potential dreams for the future? Do you see an antenna that receives inspiration? What do you see? What are the controls of this organ that you call my mind, my own mind, and with whom you've spent your entire life day and night? A commonly accepted definition could be to consider the mind as a continuous and mostly unconscious process that determines our actions at every instant based on external stimulus and the reference to past likes and dislikes. For like a sculpture hitting the stone, any response to the environment is leaving a trace in the mind that reinforces a past preference. All these traces finally define flows and streams and rivers and torrents that we may identify with, determining our identity and our singular way of interacting with the surrounding reality. And after a few years, let's say by the age of 7, most of our life's belief systems and values, and so preferences, are set. The rest of our life will consist of experiencing the so-called choices that we would have made by that age, as surely as water is always flowing within the stream bed. So now a question may arise about the unconscious dimension of the mind. If I know I exist, it means that there is some consciousness involved somewhere in the process. Where do I locate consciousness in this process? Or what is the relationship between conscious, visible pattern, and unconscious treatment from the mind? Well, right here, right now, as you are, as you stand, what do you feel? What do you feel within the framework of your body? Maybe you can feel heat in your back or moisture in your hands. What would it tell you about your mind activity if you were to pay attention to these signals? Well, maybe the feeling of heat may express that your mind is fighting against the idea or experiencing some kind of cognitive dissonance. That example, you know about the discomfort because you feel the heat. Let's take another example with a more neutral feeling, like regular blood pressure. It may express that the idea I'm discoursing about right now is just obvious and not touching anything. And just carry on writing down emails, sending SMSs, sending down pages, whatever. In these examples, the mind is doing an unconscious treatment work, out of which you observe conscious biochemical chain reaction at the surface of the body. So the so-called conscious mind is therefore only the end game. It's the visible side of the iceberg of a highly complex, unconscious process. And our experience of life with an untrained mind is biased, fragmented and partial. We do not live in the reality. We live in the reality that we believe in, and we see what we believe. So our experience of life is separate from the reality with a capital R. Plato was telling us an allegory to make us understand this. He says, man is born in a cave with projection of frightening shadows that we call reality. And it is with a great effort that he may discover the light behind the shadows. In the Vedic tradition, we find the same idea with the word Maya, the big illusion, that is the place of mankind before its realization or awakening. In modern scientific terms, David Bohm, in his theory of the implicate and explicate order, tells us that we would live in a form of holographic projection, a simplification in just 3D of a universe that is much more complex and much more intelligent than we can just imagine. So an untrained mind is bound to live in illusion. It's in the movie Matrix. We are so used to this classical allegory of the cord that is actually a snake, so you are afraid of a snake, but actually it's a cord. So we don't really live in the reality as it is, but as the reality as we think we are living in. So varieties, Maya, Big Illusion, Plato, the cavern, or David Bohm's current theory and string theory and everything, men are mistaken in thinking themselves free, and this opinion consists of this alone, that they are conscious of their action and ignorance of the cause by which they are determined. This is Spinoza, 17th century, and one of the greatest philosophers from my perspective. So what's at stake with the education of the mind? Well, nothing less than our free will. And our free will naturally lead us to a responsibility vis-à-vis our friends, our planet, and other human beings. If there is no education of the mind, there is no free will and no responsibility. We just turn around, cycling in the same circle every time. So I do not believe we will reach anything good sustainably if we do not grasp collectively this individual responsibility we have to control our greed and our feeling of insecurity, to enter the field of ethics, and to individually master the cardinal values like temperance, justice, courage, and wisdom. This is Cicero's text. Nothing new in what I'm saying. So how do we change unconscious pattern? Yes, the mind is set around the age of 7, but nothing is set forever. As we all know, the very essence of life is change, is movement. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. Another way to say it in modern neuroscientific ways is to refer to brain plasticity. And there are many testimonials of this ability of the brain to recover from intense trauma. And among a big variety, I choose Dr. Milton Erickson, who lived up to almost 80-year-old, though he contracted polio at the age of 17. And the following discussion is a very informative talk between him and one of his best students, Dr. Ernest Rossi, when he was asked to remember his first auto-hypnotical experience. As I lay in bed that night, I overheard the 3 doctors tell my parents in the other room that my boy would be dead in the morning. I felt intense anger that anyone should tell a mother her boy would be dead by the morning. My mother then came in with as serene a face can be. I asked her to arrange the dresser, push it up against the side of the bed at an angle. She did not understand why. She thought I was delirious. My speech was difficult. But at that angle, by virtue of the mirror on the dresser, I could see through the doorway to the west window of the other room. I was damned if I would die without seeing one more sunset. And if I had any skill in drawing, I could still sketch that sunset. Dr. Rossi asking, your anger and your wanting to see another sunset was a way you kept yourself alive through that critical day, in spite of doctor's prediction. But why do you call that an auto-hypnotic experience? I saw that vast sunset covering the whole sky, but I know there was also a tree there outside the window, but I blocked it out. You blocked it out? It was a selective perception that enables you to say you were in an altered state? Yes. I did not do it consciously. I saw all the sunsets, but I didn't see the fence and the large boulder that were there. I blocked out everything except the sunset. After I saw the sunset, I lost consciousness for 3 days. When I finally awakened, I asked my father why they had taken out that fence, tree, and boulder. I did not realize I had blotted them out when I fixed my attention so intensely on the sunset. Then, as I recovered and became aware of my lack of abilities, I wondered how I was going to earn a living. I had already published a paper in a national agricultural journal, but I no longer had the strength to be a farmer. Maybe I could be a doctor. I chose this long extract for a couple of reasons. First, of course, to demonstrate that, yes, change is possible. And also to illustrate a few factors involved in change and in resilience. It starts with a strong enough external stimulus that shakes up the mental structure like a trauma or symbolic death. It requires a choice to live and to experience life with a capital L in its basic majesty, like a sunset. Finally, it needs the mastery of modified state of consciousness. But these conditions, though highly classical, universal, and eternal, are difficult to be included in a scholar's system. No modern parents want their child to be traumatized to initiate the process of mind mastery. But that has not been the case all the time. We lost the tradition of initiation and rituals. In Sparta, or in still living shamanic traditions, it is frequent to send a 7-year-old kid for several days and nights alone in nature. Those who study this culture may find it barbarian, but if we include the education of the mind in our judgment, we might discover that we are the barbarians, not to include confronting death and mind mastering in our way to educate children. So back to Milton Erickson, though through the mastery of his mind he has recovered the faculty to walk and speak and even heal patients like probably no other doctor. The whole NLP movement is based on his work, and I believe 99% of the current communicators and life coaches and therapists owe him almost everything. He is an example of the power of the mind to access its unconscious potential and change, to evolve in a positive way. He was a living example of reducing terrible pain at the expense of more than an hour of auto-hypnosis every day, which leads us to the following section on the faculties of the mind. In 2000, a study conducted over 2,200 patients proved the efficiency of hypnosis used for excisional breast biopsy. Results showed a significant reduction of pain, nausea, fatigue, discomfort, emotional upset, and a cost saving of $770. I love the quantitative. This is largely due to shorter time in the operating room. And I have been personally trained in Ericksonian hypnosis. I can personally testify its efficiency on pain reduction, but also in allergy, depression, insomnia, strong anxiety generated by animals like spiders or rats. I also have seen personally people quit smoking and get rid of strong addiction with a couple of hours of just a man talking to another man. No medication, no surgery, no heavy technical platform, and no miracle neither, just pure science. Science of the mind. However, this is not where I have learned the most extraordinary faculties of the mind. They come from practicing Vipassana meditation, an atheist, body scanning type of meditation. And thanks to this technique, I experienced something beyond mind and matter that I will just never forget. It really turned my life upside down. I also learned many things from shamanic initiations and from a 2-year mediumship program where I talked to at least 100 dead people. These were astonishing experiences that I may disclose to you if you ask me the question, but out of which I came to a few personal conclusions that I wish to propose you. What are some potential faculties of the mind if we decide to train it? And that's what I say. Pain is first an information. If you go at the root cause of pain, this is just pure information. You can control that. Communication with the afterlife and channeling entities, I let you Google, absolutely incredible experiences of that. So accessing some other realms is possible through the mind. A realm of no space, no time beyond mind and matter. Some call it Satori, bliss, whatever. That exists, I can tell you. Controlling the speed of the space-time continuum flow. This is very important. From my experience, most of the people that experience major accidents they have this ability to really see 3D slow motion kind of evolution. The really space-time flow is completely different when you face death. That's possible. Sensing people and living their emotion as if I was them, that's very classical with a mother and her child. If the child is somewhere else on the planet and something happens, there's just a heart contraction like, my God. Accessing the past, present, and future of a person, this is something extraordinary, but we are all open books, you know. Our emotions just flow. What we think flow. They don't stay here. They are accessible. Remembering past lives, I had some flash of a couple of past lives. Or parallel lives. Maybe that's different. And turning the mind to leave all the dimension of the universe. This is what every vision quest in shamanic is doing. So I just wanted to say that because that happened to me. For a couple of years I've been chasing out these kind of experiences, and I've stopped that because there are some collateral damages, potential. But if you're interested, here's the list of more background in every tradition. There's the gifts of the Holy Spirit, Paul, Corinthians 12, 1:12. Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, of course, that's a reference. But also some more scientific potentials and literature. I have to hurry up, but really definitely, if we are asked how the mind of the genius is working, then it's simply that they just download knowledge. They don't create it, they just download it. That's something very basic, actually. We don't have to train by accumulating information and data processing. We just need to use our mind how it is supposed to work. I have to hurry up, so why and what for are we trained today? Well, we call this quite a lot in the morning system or living entities. And as any living entities, whether it's about religion or education or government or military forces, a system is a living entity that has to ensure homeostasis. So obeisance, conformity, repetition, accumulation is all these values that make the components of the system still believe and have faith in the system. Whereas improvisation, self-realization, understanding are highly dangerous for a system, and we've heard from Professor Faces that they are hostile places. And there are two forces, if we look at spiral dynamics, two forces between the system and individualization, so collectivization, individualization forces. And they are like the yin and the yang, they are one following dynamically the other. But this one is really the force that I would like to describe. Whether you're pushed in the outside visible world or you come back to the inside internal world. Mainstream average people need standard solution, plug and play discipline, and no understanding. But among them, some individual will ask for more. They will simply not fit into the system. They will require more meaning, more purpose, higher entropy. They are willing and capable to take more risk and gain more knowledge and wisdom. For them, esoteric teachings are needed. Esoteric science of the eternal. So the external, esoteric, hierarchical system is teaching men how to make a living, and it is essential. The other system, the esoteric, turning inside, tells us how to make a life. And I believe the nature of the shift we live today is the access for the mass and the average to the science of the mind. Internet made the teaching of every tradition available at no cost. And the more we standardize the world and the people, the more this esoteric internal force becomes. So how to balance our education? We heard this morning that maybe the system is part of the problem. And there have been always alternatives to every system, whether it's an education system and so on. And Rudolf Steiner, one of these, used to say, where is the book in which the teacher can read about what teaching is? The children themselves are the book. We should not learn to teach out of any book other than the one lying open before us and consisting of the children themselves. Another way to say it, instruction begins when you, the teacher, learn from the learner. Nothing new. We know everything starts with the teacher. And beside the teacher, which teaching? I believe in 3 pillars of mind mastery, and I believe these are all individual responsibility. No system will ever drive you to your internal fears. Morality. This is a whole theme on values and virtues from Professor Nagan, and I'm sure he would have covered this question of morality. But there are obvious laws, like the golden rules we mentioned already yesterday. But cultivating the right speech and the right action ensures that whatever we will tell and do, it is aligned with our highest reference in ethics and values. Cultivating the right livelihood, for example, would avoid us working for a company that harms people. We would not work anymore in a tobacco industry or for a bar that is not living righteously. Can you imagine a world where we just do that, having the right livelihood, the right speech, the right action? This is basic morality, but this is the first pillar. Second pillar, mind control. Meditation is a drug-free, guru-free, cost-free exercise of the mind. You just have to find a question and observe restoration. Come on, it's very basic. And though most of us ignore this exercise, however, we see the value of a shower every day, of brushing our teeth every day. But what is our basic hygiene for our mind? The mind that defines our identity, our relationship to the other. Where is the defrag in computer science? When do you clean that out? But mind control is not only meditation. It deals with vigilance. This vigilance of every moment and hence the quality of our presence in the here and the now, which is essential to avoid remembering past anxiety or dream about future. It's a continuous exercise, never to lose the balance of the mind, never to lose what is required by the situation as it is and not as we wish it to be. This would allow letting go our negativity and cutting down the chain reaction that leads to fear, need, wrath, hate. These chain reactions can be stopped at the body sensation level, far before emotion and action, but only through the right effort and with the right mindful concentration. Last pillar, wisdom. By cultivating the vigilance, we cultivate an understanding at the deep level that everything is impermanent. Any sensation, positive or negative, has the same characteristics of rising and passing away. Pain is first a piece of information before becoming a sensation. Nothing lasts forever. This proper understanding of impermanence will help cultivate another traditional value, highly essential, which is the wisdom of non-attachment. If everything is impermanent, why worry for my watch, my social status, me being a professor? Another wisdom that is to be cultivated is a sense of holiness. This modern society is the only example I know of a society that functions with no sense of holiness, not revering the sun, the earth, and the natural forces with high respect. This attitude toward the surrounding natural forces brings devotion and a positive feeling of wonder to something that we all have in common and that we all have to protect for our current need and for the need of future generations. Cultivating holiness is a key element toward altruism and ecology. Even if we cover a lot today, what is the mind and how it produces conscious body sensations, how these body sensations are related to emotions and actions with an uncontrolled chain reaction. We also learned some potential faculties of a trained and master mind that lead us to understand why exoteric systems are fighting self-individualization. We covered so many aspects to finally come back to the good old basics, morality and the golden rule. But thinking about the education of the mind is also adding beliefs to your belief system. And in that sense, I'm not helping any of you. You have to make your own discoveries by yourself. And most of the spiritual teachers I have learned simply refuse to talk. Or they repeat something like, realize the self, the true essence of who you really are, and there will be no more question. Once the false identity has been witnessed from inside as an illusion, there will be no need of any answer, since the questioner in you, which is the consequence of an untrained mind, will have been destroyed. Merge with the self, and there will be no question, no questioning, and no answer anymore. I believe that there is nothing to be done in the outside, visible, active world. I believe everything starts and ends inside. Either we train our mind, each of us, individually, to overcome our fears, or our unconscious mind will lead us to a collective collapse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for a more thought-provoking, more than thought-provoking presentation. I think this illustrates one of the points that I would like to make as to how much our perception of reality depends on the paradigm we're in. And the perception of the topic today, you have really talked about education with a capital E, and education of the mind with a capital M, including the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and in all the dimensions. I'm going to talk about briefly about the other part of this equation, and that is what we more traditionally consider part of higher education, and that's thinking. It's interesting to note that with all the talk of science and all the enormous efforts we have to promote science, that all our focus on science is on the process of validation of discovery, but not really on the process of discovery itself. I mentioned Popper here, and he's quoted, and there are many, many great scientists, including Einstein and many others, who have said that the real creative part of their process was not due to a logical function of the thinking mind in the normal sense that we know it, and for want of a better term or any other term, it's been referred to as intuition, intuitive. The logical processes, the processes that we test, that we do to validate truth, are certainly very important. That makes up the body of science. But I've often wondered, why is it that we're not spending a lot more effort trying to understand the other side of the process? Today, it looks like a black box to us. We give it a name that we don't really understand. But does that mean there's really something we can't understand about it? And if we could understand more about it, perhaps we could not just do better validation, but we could do a much better creative way of formulating hypotheses in the first place. Ivo and I wrote an article a couple of years ago, published in Cadmus, on the issue of recognizing unrecognized genius. And that article really focused on, are there some common characteristics of the action of what we call genius? And I was talking about intellectual genius or mental genius or scientific genius, not going into the other aspects of it. What do we really know about that process? So I wanted to walk through some basic thoughts about what we call thinking and what we know about the thinking process and how it may relate to this issue. And I wanted to start, which comes back to something that Pierre said, and that is, we don't always think about it, but our basic mental processes have a strong bias for physical reality. That may sound like a contradiction in terms, isn't reality physical? Assuming that the reality is physical, the mind is trained, conditioned, and naturally, just because of our biological evolution, our senses develop before our thinking develops, our sensory faculties develop before our conceptual faculties mature. So we tend to look at things physically. Our first perception of the earth is that the sun is moving and we're standing still because that's what our senses tell us. Science has evolved way beyond the senses, but still in our thinking processes, we tend to give a primacy to the physical. So I raise a basic question, and that is the reality of knowledge that we're looking for material, emotional, conceptual, or something else? And my purpose today is not to, we've already, Stephen was talking about education of consciousness. I'm not even going to go there. I think we know that our conscious life, we very much live in our thoughts. It's not really clear what those thoughts are. We live very much in our emotions. Neuroscience may tell us that there's a chemical and electrical component to our thinking and our emotions, but it's not inherently obvious that that is the entire reality of them. Yet, our thinking processes in general, not just with regard to ourselves, are very much conditioned to say that to give a primacy or an emphasis to what is physically verifiable and apparent because of our dependence on the senses. Maybe sometime last year, there was an American psychologist who did a presentation on, I think it was one of the TED videos, in which he claimed to have discovered the hormone for morality. Assuming that morality and other psychological states and ethical and highest ethical behavior must have an entirely physical explanation. I give it as an explanation. Nobody in the audience thought to question, is morality necessarily entirely explained in neurochemical terms? So we have a tendency not only to do that with external phenomenon or our observation of others, but as it was already mentioned yesterday, we tend to, and our education tends to, downgrade the value or the reality of the subjective dimension, even though that's what we live in to such a powerful extent. I'm pointing this out simply to try to make it more conscious of the fact that when we're talking about mind and thinking, there is an inherent bias, and certainly in our education. We see that very much in the study of economic theory or of all the social science theory, because the predominant tendency is to look for external, physical, systemic explanations for phenomena that are very much dependent on psychological and social perceptions. I mean, in a very short period of time, about $4 trillion disappeared from the world's wealth simply because we changed our minds about what the reality was. And now we're seeing in China something similar. So I'm just trying to point this out. So when we think about the way we think, are we really thinking about the inherent biases or premises regarding what the reality is? I like this. This is a quote from Sri Aurobindo, an Indian philosopher. He said, "The unrealized is not necessarily the unrealizable. Yet, we do have an inherent bias to believe in the reality of what exists today and to downplay the reality of what has not yet materialized. As if it may be inevitable, but because it's not there, it's not intelligible to our senses yet, it's in some sense not fully real." And yesterday we had the example of the reunification of Germany as an example. If you look at great scientific discoveries, and this slide is based very much on a book by Lee Smolin, The Trouble with Physics, in which and Ido and I drew on this material. He summarized great scientific discoveries in physics and commented that the thing they tend to have in common is they unify phenomenon that appear to be independent or not fully related to one another. And I've given a few examples here. And these are people who we attribute to have genius, the capacity to find relationships between things that are apparently unrelated to one another. Does that tell us something about our thought processes? And I'm going to argue about how we can develop our thought processes or change our emphasis in education. So the capacity to conceive of apparent contradictions as complementary dimensions of a wider reality is one characteristic of genius. And the question is, can it be taught? This is a simple framework for thinking about a very complex phenomenon of the characteristic ways in which the thinking mind works. We're all familiar with the first row, the analytic thinking, which is we focus on a part of reality, we take it for the whole reality, we zoom down to the more specific, and analytic thinking has a tremendous capacity to give us knowledge of the part, the uniqueness of the part, what distinguishes it from everything else. We have another capacity of mind, and that is to try to see the big picture. But when the mind tries to see the big picture, we end up not really seeing the integrity of the whole. We end up seeing lots of parts of the whole. We end up kind of adding up all the parts that we've divided. So when we talk about education, we list 50 disciplines or 1,000 sub-disciplines, and we say education includes all of those things. And we have added a lot of things to the list in the last 2 days. What we call synthetic, what I'm calling here synthetic, is more an attempt to piece together all of the pieces which have already been fragmented. And systems thinking has made a major advance in the sciences in the last century by trying to conceive of the whole that relates a lot of things that we thought were separate and often independent. And we're looking for what's the commonality, what's the relationship between these discrete parts or discrete steps in an operation. I'm trying to point towards a third type of thinking, which for want of a better word, I'm calling it integrated. Maybe I should have called it integrated that really sees things at the fundamental level of where there is a oneness between them, at an essential level, rather than seeing their uniqueness, rather than even seeing their commonality. We look at where, at an essential level, where they really are the same phenomena. Last September, we had a 6-day course here on what we called Towards a Transdisciplinary Science of Society, where we were really trying to focus on what do all the social sciences have in common. In the natural sciences, whether you're a physicist, a chemist, an astronomer, a geologist, a meteorologist, or whatever else it is, we all start with a common base. There are fundamental principles that are common to all of these sciences. There are physical principles, chemical principles, and so forth. Yet in the social sciences, even when we try to link things together, and one of the questions we had from one of our online students was, what's the difference between multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary and transdisciplinary? And I think that my answer to that would be, multidisciplinary, we try to piece things together and look at their relationship. Transdisciplinary, we're trying to see, are there common processes? Are there common processes that are there in all human activity, regardless whether it's in the economic sphere, the social sphere? And we've had very rich discussion on this. So I'm raising this from the point of view of which is the type of thinking that we are consciously developing in our educational system, and how much emphasis is there on each, and is it possible in any or every subject to shift the focus more from the analytical, which we know well and which is what our modern science has been founded on, more down this list. And just to illustrate this, we're all in economics very familiar with the ongoing debate between neoliberalism and neo-Keynesianism and other varieties. And we hear the back and forth discussion on and on, going on and on as to which perspective is right, with the inherent assumption that one is right and one is wrong, that we have to choose one is right as one is wrong. It's truth versus truth. I think this is very characteristic of when we look at phenomenon from an analytic point of view. We end up wanting to find out which one's right and which one's wrong. When we try to look holistically, we try to see, well, in fact, markets are very important because you can't really have productive economic activity without freedom for human initiative, but in fact, you really can't have markets and free markets without regulation. And it's not a question of whether we need freedom or we need regulation. Without a proper balance between both of them, we don't have anything. The reality is more complex. We have to look at both sides. If you wanted to take it to a deeper level, haven't we oversimplified reality, grossly oversimplified reality? Because the real productive wealth and activity of a society depends on the relationship between creative, dynamic individuals and the society which supports, gives freedom, draws on their capacity and develops the capacity of all the people around them. And isn't this whole debate between freedom and regulation a gross oversimplification of the reality which has a fundamental basis in human social processes? It depends on how much energy the society generates. It depends on the organizational capabilities. It depends on the aspirations of the people. It depends on our awareness and perceptions. It depends on our values and all. So I'm just trying to use this as an example to illustrate why maybe we can think about working out a shift in the emphasis. It doesn't mean there's not a role for analysis, and there's certainly a role for synthesis, but can't we, within the existing subject matter, move down the line? And I'll close with just one more, a book I recently came across, which I found I resonated with a lot. Perhaps some of you are familiar with his thought. I'd recommend it. By William Byers. It's called Deep Thinking. I had already prepared my presentation before I read this book, but I found it. He's a Canadian mathematician, but he's essentially made clear to me some things that we've been working on in the academy for years, but I never had a real clarity on how to express it. His point is that all knowledge is based on a conceptual framework. We cannot know anything without having a conceptual framework. Our language, our definitions, our vocabulary is a conceptual framework. And he starts, I'm not going to go into it, but he starts even just in basic mathematics. He says there are two fundamental conceptual frameworks with which we start with basic mathematics, and that is one, that the numbers represent a count of things, and the other is that the numbers represent distances, quantities. And these are two essentially different things. And soon we get into the fact that numbers can represent fractions of a whole, which is an entirely different conceptual framework. And later on, somebody asked us to deduct 8 from 5, and we say you can't deduct 8 from 5 because there's only 5 things to take away. And that, no, you see, we can have a negative. We can have a conception of a negative number, which is a new paradigm. And his point is, from the beginnings of our education, we are learning new paradigms. The characteristic of a paradigm is from within the existing paradigm, the perspective from outside that paradigm makes no sense. And problems that confront us, which we're unable to solve, appear because we insist on limiting ourselves within the existing paradigm. Well, when I read this, I said, well, this is exactly the conclusion we came to in the World Academy. That the problems that we're facing today, we cannot solve within the existing intellectual framework, whether it's economics or political science or sociology or ecology, whatever it is. But it's so difficult from within that to get out. Once you get out, once you look at the wider paradigm, it doesn't negate the other paradigms. It doesn't say economics is all wrong or political science. It simply says they're part of a wider whole, and we have to understand them from a wider perspective. Bayer's point is that we've been learning new paradigms all our life, but we've been learning the new paradigms that humanity has discovered over a few thousand years, and nobody's told us they're new paradigms. Maybe when you get from analytic geometry to nonlinear, or from linear geometry to nonlinear geometry, you scratch your head for a long time, and somebody finally tells you this is a whole new paradigm of reality. But we have been growing and evolving, and we are capable of that development. So I was asking myself, nobody ever told me through my education this simple principle that all this time, as I have been learning more of accumulated knowledge, that there are times when we're moving to an entirely new paradigm. I think for the physicists it's most obvious, moving from a geocentric to a heliocentric universe, or from Newtonian physics to relativity and so forth. The physicists are those who are most qualified from their conscious experience to know they didn't negate Newtonian physics. They saw it as a special case of a much wider phenomenon. How much, I don't know how far in physics, physicists are being taught to try to look beyond the paradigm. We accept the paradigms that have been discovered, but I certainly think in the social sciences or in other fields, I don't think it's very conscious. Imagine if the educational process we had, we don't have to go into with the same existing knowledge, if we can teach the knowledge we're teaching and make conscious the transitions that we've already made, and make conscious the process by which we transit from one paradigm to another, as we are from an economic to an ecological paradigm or a human-centered paradigm, the more conscious we are of that. That's what I was thinking of as conscious education when you spoke this morning, Stephen. Wouldn't we be creating not just a knowledge, but we'd be creating the capacity to create, and as Ivo often says, to come out of the box. Thanks.
This section is about the education of the mind, and I found myself quite stimulated by Pierre and Garry's presentation. I also, might be my limitation, starting with you, Pierre, that today had so elegant and sported such a beautiful tie that I envy you. You know, with your sympathy, you said a lot of things that I would totally subscribe, meaning the often untapped power of our minds, and if we focalize, we can develop our potentialities. But I didn't hear you to mention some important aspects, three, which, in my opinion, if those are not equally mentioned and recognized for their importance, then what you said, in my opinion, become dangerous. I'm going to explain what. We know, for example, psychology, social psychology, anthropology, and nowadays, neuroscience, as you mentioned, a lot about human beings and how, neuroscience has explained what we do in terms of neural connection. So certainly, as you said, the individual mind is relevant. I understand it fully because I'm a psychotherapist and I work with individual families and groups that are made up of individuals. But I didn't hear one much more, basic aspect of individual mind, which is a social mind, which is not called social mind, it's called culture, it's called tradition, it's called social ideals, social norms and social taboo, laws, and regime, democracy or dictatorship, for example. Not to mention religion, political ideology, although. So, if I certainly have a self-perception of who am I, and I have also a self-ideal of what I want to strive to achieve, well, to ignore that I totally immerse from the before even I'm born in the social interaction, is a serious lack in my eyes. Why? Because then, and that's the second problem, which is emphasized also by social neuroscience, that in my institute and my people treat a lot of people that have a serious addiction. And some of this serious addiction is magical thinking. They think that if they would just learn the good trick, and they have a life of hopping between doctor to doctor, psychologist to psychologist, psychiatrist to psychiatrist, guru to guru, sect to sect, religion to religion, political party to political party, whatever, drinking exoteric teas, that take a dramatic shortcut, delusional shortcut, from the daily challenge of figuring out how to live in a meaningful way life, and how to problem solve, and how life not only presents me with problems, but also presents me with paradigms, with things like, I'm gonna die. No matter what I do, I'm gonna die. No matter what I do, I'm gonna grow old. No matter what I do, I'm subjected to forces that no trick is gonna make me to have a discount. So, this is with the full recognition, by the way, Carl Rogers, my mentor, wrote a nice paper on, the work of Milton Erickson, certainly, powerful guy, in promoting change and entering the belief system. So we know that we can help people from being dysfunctional to themselves and others to become more functional. But I think it's really important to underline the danger, because if we can help an hypochondriac person to relax and accept his mortality and his fragility, and relax and enjoy life, because we are fragile and mortal. So what? Under this limitation, we can love, be creative, and all that. And also, I'm well aware of the research. Harold Bloomfield is a very good friend of mine. He's the Yale psychiatrist that many years ago published that giant research showing the benefit of transcendental meditation. So, we know very well that transcendental meditation and other forms of meditation are beneficial statistically to people, but they are not beneficial to people that are addicted to have a shortcut to avoid confronting the dilemma of living a life metaphysically. So, there is a great danger on learning the right way. And this is very, very diffuse. And a lot of people fall victims of guru, of political leader, of religious leader, whatever, So it's the way you relate to things, because they are powerful, but they are in the both ways. Mind that you mentioned is the same mind that had people kill happily other human beings just because they were Jews, okay? Or because they are not of the right sect of Muslim nowadays, or because they are Christian, let's bomb their church, or vice versa. Mind does a lot of good things and does a lot of horrible things. So, I think this has to be emphasized. And also, I have problem with all the shortcuts and all the things that hide consciousness. Let me give you an example. You mentioned past lives. I jumped a little bit in my chair, not because I do not believe in past life. I don't. But that's pretty fine for me if you do. But I have a problem if you do, and many other millions of people do believe in past lives, and think that their predicament today, because they are oppressed, because they are exploited, it do what their karma is bringing to them from what they did in past life. That's a perfect, recipe for disempowerment, for being oppressed and thinking that is my fault. And we see a lot of that going on, not only in the past, in the present. I was saying that in my institute, the First of Southern Institute, there are some people, I'm not among them, but they are expert in helping people that have been victim of sects, like Scientology, whatever. And we have this kind of incredible stories. I remember the story, Italian people, of somebody and her husband giving all their money, a lot of money, to a very small religious sect, to be kicked out a few years later, but not money back. And so fascinated. And I asked, why did you do that? Giving all your money. Give them half. Look for the future. Well, he said, we were so in love, and finally we had found a place that would give us a meaningful life, and some containment for our anxiety. Now, I think, this has to be mentioned, otherwise we are dangerously promoting self-delusion and disempowerment. The third point is what I just mentioned. Technique, they exist and can be used proficiently, no matter what, how you put a nail on the wall to put on a picture on your wall. But, there is also the trick is not to get addicted to simplify life that is a complex and unruly matter. You cannot really put life comfortably in a little square or have other gurus decide how you live, love, and learn. And so, I'm also skeptical of any technique used without self-consciousness. That is a technique, and there is a usefulness in it, but also some dangers. Like everything else. Even a good sharp knife can be very handy if you cut your carrots, or very, very dangerous if you use it otherwise. So, very, very interesting, but I would underline the dangers in this. For what was Garry, I agree very much. I was just to underline what I also heard you saying with different words, which is, I think, fundamental. Freedom, which is precious, sacred, is never licensed. And again, if we just emphasize on individual and individual rights, and not also on individual responsibility towards the other fellow human being, it's dangerous. We become narcissistic, autistic people, and this is incredibly, I have lived, and I went to Berkeley, California in 1968. It was paradise. I was very shy. Unfortunately, I'm still shy, although I can hide it, but I'm still shy. And I was in paradise, everything, the golden age, new age, they call it. And wow, and the girls, wow, I felt great potentiality. But very, very quick, I asked myself, what about social change? What about injustice? What about people dying of starvation? What about women being oppressed all over the world, including in California? What about minority groups like blacks, like homosexuals that in California until 1973 were labeled as psychiatrically and psychologically sick? So, the goal of many, a slogan that was Timothy Leary, drop out and drop in. Don't get, mixed up with society, become more conscious. I think that was an irresponsible slogan and a tragedy, as it became the age of narcissism. We want to drop in, but not at all to drop out. We want to facilitate people that are aware on the individual, on the family, the social level, and our friend from South Korea was rightly underlined on responsible not only for our fellow human beings, but also have a responsible relationship with every living organism, including our planet. That's my point.